excited for this one.
Okay, just one thing, if we can ask you, we need to know exactly, and with I'll tell you how many of our students arrived. So this will be also, he's going to check, but if you have you've all got two things, is the badge and also the evaluation sheet for this afternoon. So I'm just thinking here about the participants coming from CILE for this week and starting this week. So if you can get this, you can see who you are and if you are here. And then also don't forget about the evaluation. Now we are going to have our third session. We might have to more thinking about having half an hour break instead of 45 minutes, because it's as if you are wasting time and you need to think more. So we'll try to see if we can maybe organize this. Dr. Mohammed Ghaly, who is professor of, he is at CILE, professor of Islam and biomedical ethics. And he will do something which is the next step. So we have a general introduction, then the history with the challenges, and he is going to work on introduce a more practical way to deal with all what we have been talking about in his field, bioethics.
Thanks, Dr. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you here and to be in Granada for the first time. And I have to say something of myself, very short, so that you can put me in the right context. I'm not a physician. I didn't study medicine. I did religious studies. I did Islamic studies at Lazhar University. And then I did my master and PhD also in Islamic studies at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Then I joined the center. So I come from a specific discipline. And here we speak about something interdisciplinary. So I belong to one part, one disciplinary, but I try to make bridges between them. But of course, the fact that I have this background may affect my neutrality and objectivity in trying to bridge between the disciplines. I hope this will not be clear in my talk, but if you notice, then you know why. I will start with one main remark about the nature of bioethics when we put Islamic before, or when we say about Islam and the biomedical ethics. It is something within the religious tradition. It has been always within the religious tradition until now. So, till the discussions that we have nowadays about Islam and biomedical ethics, it is something within Islam as a religion. So it is not an independent discipline like what we have in some of the universities in Europe and the US. It's its own discipline, completely independent. This is not the case in the Islamic tradition. There is a part of religion and there is a part of medicine. And you can move within these lines, but you don't go outside these lines. So you can leave a bit space, you can go to the adhere completely to the line, but you don't go outside and you don't become an independent thing. You remain within the religion. And throughout the centuries, it has always been the $1 million question how to do this. How to remain within the boundaries of religion and to take medicine seriously and to take the medical knowledge seriously without going beyond the borders of the religious tradition. It was a big deal always, so it is not something that we have to suffer and struggle and grapple with now, but it's also a historical issue. What happened in the history? I call, and I wrote in a number of my published writings, that biomedical ethics in Islam was a religion come biomedicine ethics. It was not only religion and it was not only biomedicine. So it was usually both. And this is, if we want to characterize the Islamic tradition in general, which will be a sweeping statement, because there are exceptions. There are Muslim jurists, Muslim religious scholars who found that medicine cannot have a say because we have a religion. There are some who did this, and I wrote about it. But this didn't change the main characteristic of the Islamic tradition and its relation to biomedical ethics. In the past, we can speak about systematic overlapping borders between religion and biomedicine. People going forth and back. It may look at first sight that there is chaos, but actually when you go to the depth, when you read the tradition in a very deep and sophisticated way, you try to discover by time how systematic it is. So there is overlapping borders between religion and biomedicine, but this was systematic. It became systematic for many factors. One of the most important factors is a phenomenon. It was a phenomenon in the Islamic tradition that we have the jurist physician and the physician jurist. Those people who are very well versed in both sides. And we have so many names. Ibn Rushd wrote an important textbook in medicine and a very important textbook in fiqh. Kulliyat in medicine and Bidayat al-Mujtahidin. Ibn Nafis, a very important physician, who is calculated, and you see his biography in Tabaqat al-Shafi'i, the biographies of the Shafi'i scholars, the Shafi'i jurists. So, and if you take any book on Tabaqat al-Fuqaha, you will see physicians. And if you take any book on Tabaqat al-Atibba, you will see jurists. So the overlapping was happening anyhow and was going on anyhow because of the specialization. And those who were not, who didn't have dual interest, jurist, physician, or physician, jurist, they had access to first-hand authoritative medical sources. So if you want to contextualize it in what we have now, they didn't need to ask their friend who is a physician to tell them what is this actually. They didn't have this problem, access to knowledge. They had access to knowledge. And they had the access to the most updated, authoritative medical sources in their time. Al-Qarafi, for instance, in his book Al-Furuq, a very usuli juristic work, he's quoting Al-Irshad li Masalih al-Anfusi wal-Ajsad by Ibn Jumayr, a very important medical source, and he takes pages explaining what Ibn Jumayr is saying in this book. How does this information relate to our understanding of specific issues in fiqh, etc.? There was no problem in doing this. Ibn al-Qayyim, in many of his books, he is quoting literally from the books of Hippocrates, which were available in his time and very important seminal books for physicians of his time. So they had access to the books. He could understand them. They could translate this medical knowledge into juristic application. We have also references in historical sources saying that sometimes even face-to-face consultation was going on. Ibn al-Qayyim, in one of his books, he speaks about his conversation with Ra'is al-Atibba al-Qahira. When he went to Cairo, he met with the head of the physicians in Cairo. He had discussions with him. The conclusions of these discussions, he wrote them down in one of his books on تحفة المولود بأحكام المولود. So can we speak about healthy relationship between medicine and religious scholars, or religion, in this case Islam, and medicine in the pre-modern time? Generally speaking, I would say yes, there was a healthy relationship, and not only healthy, very sophisticated relationship. It was not simplistic as we have sometimes in our age now. There have been, I completely understand that there have been religious scholars who were rigid, who were dogmatic, and who looked down upon medicine. I understand this, and I wrote about these jurists. But they didn't create the main characteristics of the tradition. They remained most of the time on the margin or outside the main borders of the paradigm of main paradigms in the Islamic tradition. And one also of the main factors of creating this healthy relationship is that medicine or medical knowledge or applied sciences in general, they had a very important position in daily life of people. Abdulhamid Sabra, one of the important historians in this regard, especially in his seminal article, The Appropriation and Subsequent Naturalization of Greek Science in Medieval Islam, he brings plenty of evidence about how integral science was part of daily life of people in Islamic history. So it was not only the work of the jurists. Books written and aimed for common people included biomedical information. So even jurists who didn't want to get involved in discussions about the relevance of biomedical sciences for Islamic law, it was not possible. Because these were questions coming from the public who were aware of what's going on. Something which is also different about our time. That common people are educated about biomedical knowledge, this is something that we miss, which also complicates the task of creating Islamic paradigm for biomedical sciences. In the modern time, things changed, and it changed most of the time in the negative sense. So the overlapping borders between religion and biomedicine in Islam remained, but it became more and more tensioned, more and more problematic at a number of levels. Of course, the most problematic issue is that biomedical sciences developed very quickly and very radically outside the Islamic tradition. So it was not part of the Islamic civilization anymore. Of course, people who developed biomedical sciences in the Islamic history, they were not all Muslims. But they were working within the main paradigm of Islamic civilization. It was not something very far from the religious scholars, but now it is. They are not even aware of what's going on. I give just an example. Mohammed ibn Ali ibn Hussein al-Maliki al-Makki is the Mufti of the Malikis in Mecca in the first half of the 20th century. He wrote a commentary, short commentary, on the book that I've just mentioned of Al-Qarafi. Al-Qarafi was from the 13th century, who wrote his book, who incorporated the knowledge of Greek and Jewish physicians in his fiqhi work. And after 7 centuries, Muhammad ibn Ali is writing a commentary, and through these 7 centuries, some jurists were online with Al-Qarafi's conclusions, which were revolutionary at his time, and others were not. So Muhammad ibn Ali tried to find a midway between those who are with Al-Qarafi and those who are against. And again, he is quoting the same sources that Al-Qarafi was quoting 7 centuries ago. He didn't go one single step beyond what happened. He is not aware that the Greek medicine is not there anymore. And people do not use this. And it's not authoritative as it was at the time of Al-Qarafi. The whole thing has changed. So even aware of what's going on for some religious scholars, it was not the case. And Muhammad ibn Ali was not against medicine. He is for medicine. He supported Al-Qarafi because he said what Al-Qarafi said is in line with biomedical knowledge, etc. So he is not anti-medicine, but he is not aware of the radical changes that was going on. So this, of course, tension the relation between religion and biomedicine. Also, the very quick tempo and shocking tempo sometimes of biomedical technologies expanded more or less the authority or the scope of the authority of biomedical knowledge. The old perception that medicine and physicians is something to be done in the room with the patient and society remains outside what's going on. It's something to be done in the lab. Patient-doctor relationship, this is not the case anymore. The revolutionary character of biomedical technologies challenged many of the long-established concepts in the field of humanities, in the field of philosophy. What is health? What is health? And what is sickness? Plastic surgery changed this concept. If I am not satisfied with my face, if I'm not satisfied with my body, even if everyone will think that I'm healthy, but I don't think so. And physician will intervene in this body in order to make it as closer as possible to what I want. Is this a physician who is treating a disease? Is there sickness here or absence of health, etc.? Problematize these concepts. Life and death, of course, now it's not as easy as it was before to define what life and what death is. Even the human being, what is a human being? When we have a fertilized ovum in an IVF process, do we deal here with a human being? Or we don't deal with a human being? Becomes a human being only when it is settled in the uterus during pregnancy or from day one? Or only after 120 days? What is the human being? Someone who does not have any cognitive capacities with brain dead diagnosis sitting in a hospital. Is this a human being? A living, a dead person? What's this? So biomedical technologies problematized all these concepts. So it went into the depth of religion. It was not only about the issue of halal and haram, but even theology. It raised questions about theology, like the seen and the unseen, al-ghayb wal-shahada. When we read the Quranic verse about وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْأَرْحَامِ, and he, and you can put between brackets only, he, God, only knows what's in the wombs. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْأَرْحَامِ. 99% of the religious scholars, they said if it is, he knows if it is a boy or a girl. We don't know if it is a boy or girl in the wombs, but God knows. And we have a hadith telling that the angel asks God, is it a boy, is it a girl? And then he writes down if it is a boy or a girl. Now, it's not only that we know, but we can even manipulate. We can even choose the sex of the baby, if it will be a boy or a girl. In the IVF process, you can make this choice. So, the unseen became seen. Ghayb became shahada. And not only it became shahada, it became manageable. Something that you can manage, that you can change. Now, through the genomic medicine and gene sequencing, what we call next generation gene sequencing, we can, through a little sample from your body, know if your grandchildren will get cancer or not. This was usually unseen, right? Future. Now it is not. How are we going to challenge with this? Does this mean that the concept of the seen and the unseen is relative? The borders between the seen and unseen can change by time or not? Should we stop these physicians who try to engage themselves in what we perceive as unseen from doing what they are supposed to do? These were big questions, big challenges that came up with the biomedical sciences in a time in which religious scholars stopped studying anything but the so-called Islamic sciences. In a faculty of Sharia or a faculty of Islamic studies, you don't get biology. You don't study biology. You don't study medicine, even the basics. You don't get anything about this. It's only Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Tafsir, Quran exegesis, hermeneutics, etc. That's it. So they get more and more outside, isolated from biomedical sciences, but the biomedical sciences are running after them. They are challenging what they are doing. They try to escape from, but it doesn't leave them alone. So they have to get engaged, but they are not well equipped to deal with this. So this was, of course, a big problem. Also the problem of language and terminology that Dr. Tariq spoke about. It was even a problem of translating the terminology. They don't know English, the great majority of these religious scholars. The updated information are available in English, French, or German sources, which they cannot have access to, so someone should translate for them. How precise the translation is, very problematic. So with this explosion of scientific dictums challenging juristic conceptions, the approach of the contemporary religious scholars, they spoke about nawazil. And nawazil is the plural of nazila, which means a predicament. A question or an issue which is new and which is sophisticated and which is shocking to some extent. So it needs from the religious scholars a lot of sophistication, a lot of sophisticated hermeneutics in order to come up with a solution. And this is not new. We have a lot of books in Islamic history about nawazil. We have Nawazil Ahl al-Andalus. We are here in Granada. A lot of literature is wrote about this type of issue. There was an Islamic ruling government. Now there is not. How should people deal with this? It's nazila. This was nazila. And they said, yeah, now we have also. We have also a nazila. We have a big problem. We don't know how to deal with this. So this should be our approach. Some literature called it qadaya mustajadda, new issues, so they coined the new term. When Rashid Rida in 1910, so very early in the 20th century, he received a question from someone from Tunisia, asking him about the maximum period of pregnancy. In Islamic law, there is a lot of discussion about the minimum and maximum possible length of pregnancy because it relates to a number of juristic rulings. We have no time to speak about these complications, but it is important to calculate the maximum and minimum possible length of pregnancy. This questioner from Tunisia, he said now we have French physicians who tell us that the maximum period of pregnancy, which was in the perception of many religious scholars, would go beyond even a couple of years. Pregnancy can continue for 4, 5, even to 6 or 8 or 11 years. And French physicians were laughing at them. They said it's impossible because we know now it cannot be, the child will die. So what's important for us is that the questioner raised the question not only to Rashid Rida. He said this question is not only for you, but it is for you and for Tawfiq Sidqi, who was a very close friend of Rashid Rida and who was a physician. Was an important physician at this time. He said it's a question for you and for him as well. So you both should tell us if this is true or not, because there is medicine. And Rida, in the title of his fatwa, he said the duration of pregnancy from religious and medical perspectives. مدة حمل النساء طبا وشرعا. So now he incorporates medicine in his own fatwa. And Rashid Rida, in this fatwa, he said, if modern knowledge, and he means by this medicine, is rejected, there is a danger that educated Muslims, especially students of medicine, will cease to respect their religion as divine. Because they will find that there is a contradiction between what they study and believe that it is certain, and their religion, which they believe that it is revealed. So how come sources of knowledge will contradict what God revealed to us through the universe, through nature, and what he revealed to us through word, the Quran? How come they will contradict if we believe that the source is the same? So he said, if we don't take medicine seriously, we may lose this group of the Muslims. This was the fatwa of Rashid. Another very important fatwa, whose timing is also very important. Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Sa'di. Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Sa'di is Najdi, is Hanbali. So he cannot accused by any stretch of the imagination that he is westernized or he is influenced by Western thought or whatever. We cannot accuse him of this anyhow. So to introduce him as Najdi, Hanbali, Saudi is very important. He was asked, and was one of the very first fatwas on organ transplantation. And someone sent him a question about this in the 50s. And it was very early at this time to speak about this topic. What is important in the fatwa? Sheikh al-Sa'di said, first and foremost, the jurist must have the right perception, tasawwur, of such an issue. So if you ask me, what does Islam say about organ transplantation? The very first, I should know what is organ transplantation. And then I can go further. But if I don't have a perception about the issue at hand, as comprehensive as possible, I cannot give an answer. Or I can try to give an answer, but it will not be an answer for your question. It may be an answer for something completely different. And he said, developing the right perception, now, this is something that he recognizes by the beginning of the second half of the 20th century, crafting the perception, developing the perception, is to be done by medicine, not to be done by the jurists. So here, for the first, we see people who recognize that physicians should be part, medicine should be part of the discourse, but also speak about which part, how their role can be designed. So he spoke about tasawwur, to understand the issue at hand. And I would say at this time, this was completely revolutionary. At this time. So the religious scholars, now they volunteer to give away part of their traditional task to someone else. They say, to understand the question we cannot do, it should be done by someone else, because they understand how difficult the situation is, and they cannot do it. Even if they try, if they are going to be stubborn, they will not be able to. So they say, we give it to you, please tell us about this. And he also more or less reiterated what Rashid Rida said. He said, without taking scientific dictums and science seriously, people will get the impression that Islam is not compatible with modern scientific advancements and thus cannot provide answers for questions raised by these advancements. So if we didn't go this way, we will not even be able to give an answer for a question, which is something very serious for religious scholars. Because the starting point for religious scholars is that Islam is for everywhere and every time. So as a Muslim, I can live with my religion every time and everywhere. So now the time, with this scientific revolution, how can I live with Islam? He said, if we didn't take medicine seriously, we will not be able to achieve this starting point. The concern of the religious scholars about how to make Islam relevant for what's going on now in the field of biomedicine and its revolutionary questions was not the concern of religious scholars alone, but it was also the concern of the physicians and Muslim physicians and Muslims who are working in the field of biomedical sciences. I don't know if you know this day, 25 July 1978, a couple of minutes before midnight, something very important happened in the UK. Someone was born, Louise Brown. Louise Brown was born through the IVF technology. So we see for the first time that the sperm and the ovum are fertilized outside the womb. Was this a creation that people create? A new baby? Is it playing God? It was a huge issue at this time. And in Kuwait, where there was a lot of money for people to do research and to contemplate, by the end of the 80s, these two guys, Abdurrahman Al-Awadi, who is a specialist in public health, and the pharmacologist Ahmed Al-Gindi, they were both in Kuwait. Abdurrahman Al-Awadi is Kuwaiti and Al-Gindi is Egyptian, living in Kuwait at this time. In personal discussion with them, they told me when they heard about this, Al-Gindi went to Abdurrahman Al-Awadi and he said, what should we do? What should we do? Because now it's going too far. What does Islam say about this? What does Islam say about this? The one who made the IVF process, the physician who got the Nobel Prize, British one, Nobel Prize name, he was invited later in a conference in Riyadh. And the conference, some of the religious scholars, the conference was about medicine, just about medicine. Some of the religious scholars, they wanted to have a session, dedicate a session to al-i'jaz al-ilmi fi al-Quran, in miraculous parts of the Quran and Sunnah concerning science. In order to make da'wah, propagate Islam among these physicians, and to tell them what you say is actually in the Quran. So what do you think? I know this information from Mohammed Al-Bar, a Saudi physician who attended this whole session. And they were speaking in the session to these physicians in order to tell them how miraculous information are in the Quran and Sunnah. And this physician, British physician, told Muhammad Ali Al-Bar, he said, it's not my concern if the Quran already foretold what I did or not. My main concern is, what does Islam say about this? About what I did? I want to know. From an ethical perspective, what does Islam say? Can you tell me? And Al-Bar said, at this time we didn't discuss the issue, and we didn't know. We didn't know. What does Islam say about this? If you will do the fertilization process outside the womb, how far this is possible? So from here, we see the birth of the collective ijtihad. From the fatwa of Shaykh al-Sa'di till the 80s, the beginning of the 80s, it was an individual approach. A question from a Muslim asking the religious scholar, is it halal, is it haram? And the religious scholar answered. That's it. By the time they realized this is not possible, as I show in some fatwas like Rashid Rida, like Al-Sa'di, and many others, they said it must be collective. And not only collective in the sense that we have more than one religious scholars, no. Then we have more than one specialization on the table. We'll have people specialized in religious sciences and also in biomedical sciences to come together. And from here we have the birth of collective ijtihad, a collective approach to Islamic bioethics, and we have a couple of very important and seminal developments in the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. The decade of the 1980s is actually the decade in which contemporary Islamic bioethics is born, as we see it now. And it has been also institutionalized. We have an Islamic Fiqh Academy in Jeddah, an Islamic Fiqh Academy in Mecca, Islamic Organization for Biomedical Sciences in Kuwait. So we see a new era, a new age in which religious scholars freely accept the integration of biomedical sciences, and physicians speaking with them about what Islam say, what does Islam say about these issues. And by going through the publications now available of these meetings and seminars in which religious scholars and physicians come together, we can have some panoramic overall remarks about how do contemporary Muslim religious scholars think of science in the modern time. Because in their writings, when they write about al-i'jaz al-ilmi, for instance, they speak very positively about science because it's all theoretical. But when it comes to reality, real questions and how authoritative science can be, then you see the real flesh, if it will be flesh or bones. About quantity, it's clear that Muslim religious scholars are immensely amazed and shocked by the amount of information. They cannot imagine that this tempo of producing information is going on. So they have been completely shocked by what's going on. About the quality, there was a question here about how to integrate science and scripture or something like this. Most of the religious scholars, especially by the beginning of the 80s, the first meetings they had with the physicians, they thought medicine is certain. قطعي. Medicine is قطعي. What physicians say, this is the final word. There is no doubt about it. But fiqh is zanni, is probable, because it's a human understanding of the text. So I may make mistake in this. So when we have disagreement between jurists and physicians, physicians will win. Because they have certainty, and I, as a religious scholar, I have probability. And in one of the conferences, 1985, 1986, they realized this is not the case. It was a conference on the beginning of human life, and they had a gynecologist who introduced the paper, a neurologist who introduced the paper. The gynecologist, he said, this is the only way to understand the beginning of human life from a medical perspective. Anything else will be more folklore than science. The neurologist was insisting that this so-called folklore is the real science and is the real medicine. And he quoted from the most prestigious medical journals in order to support his viewpoint. So religious scholars were shocked that how come that you have labs, you have all the facilities, and still you disagree with each other, more or less like the religious scholars, or even worse. So how come? Here also the thing became very problematic in the mindset of the religious scholars, and again the struggle started new. Also, they realized very much that it is Western production. It is something produced in the West. It has a negative aspect, that it is introduced in a time where, in a context where religion, where science was anti-religious, and people could practice these scientific discoveries only after getting an irrevocable divorce between science and religion. Only when they had this, they could make the science. So these people are not very friendly to religion, so we have to take care about what they bring to us. This was a negative aspect. Another positive aspect in this is that they want all the time to listen what Western academies say about the issue at hand. So they are not interested in what the medical faculties at Cairo University say about genomic medicine. It's not interesting for them at all. But they are interested in what's going on in California, in Princeton, in Harvard, and Oxford. What these people say about medicine, this is the medicine. So we have to hire people who can tell us about what's going on there. We don't care about the Muslim world when it comes to medicine. So it is a Western production. It is very clear in their mind. Also, unpredictability. There is an issue in Islamic law that it is not positive, it is bad to imagine things that do not exist, and then you say, what does Islam say about this? The hypothesizers, al-ara'aytiyun in the Islamic legal tradition. This happened in a specific moment in Islamic history when jurists were more or less redundant in society because all questions were answered. So to make yourself relevant, you have to create new questions. So this was seen very negatively, and it was suppressed more or less throughout history. And no religious scholar would like to be affiliated with this tradition. And most of the questions raised by the physicians were things that did not happen yet, like human cloning. They discussed the human cloning in the 90s, when Dolly was cloned. But it was an animal, it was not a human. So normally, we have to wait till a human is cloned, and then we discuss the issue. But the physicians, they said, maybe he has already been cloned and we don't know. So it is so unpredictable. So you have to go outside of this box, and you think that you have to wait all the time till things happen, and then you have to, no, you have to have your own position even if things are not realized. So they perceive this now, and they are ready to discuss things which have not happened before. Also transdisciplinary. So Islamic law only will not solve the issue, Islamic theology only will not solve the issue, but biomedical sciences should be an integral part of the whole process. And before taking the paper of Dr. Tariq, about 5 minutes, I will try to summarize my points. The biomedical science who have been participating in the collective discussions till now had something to do with the perception of the religious scholars about what science is. So for instance, they should have strong link with the source of the scientific explosion, scientific revolution, the West. All the physicians who have been participating in these meetings, none of them got his PhD from the Muslim. None of them. They are all getting it from the West, especially UK and USA. Also affiliation with international organizations, especially World Health Organization. It's also very important for them because they want to have Islam as part of the global discourse. And for them, WHO is a good platform to inject Islam into this. At least this is what they perceive. Also, affinity with the Islamic tradition, which is also a very important point for them. They choose physicians that they trust. These people are practicing, the physicians. The physicians are concerned about Islam. They are not collaborators with the Western biomedical scientific academies. That they came to us in order to change Islam, in order to misform Islam. No, there are people who are concerned about Islam, they just give us information. So trust is a very important issue. Most of the physicians who participate in the collective meetings are very good friends of the religious scholars. So trust is a very important point. That's why I always say, but I leave this to the conclusion. The role of the biomedical scientists, what do they do? First of all, setting the agenda. They decide which questions should be asked. They are the ones who will decide these questions. Because religious scholars don't know what's going on. So physicians tell them. Developing the perception, tasawwur, of the issues. And it's not controversial at all among religious scholars now. They accept that the perception must be developed by someone else. Tasawwur. But what is controversial and what is problematic is drafting the juristic conclusions. And in the collective meetings, we see that some physicians go beyond speaking about the perception and even give their own opinion about what Islam actually should say about this issue. Even if this issue should be seen as halal or haram. And this is very problematic. And some religious scholars wrote even published articles about this, and they find this one of the big dilemmas in contemporary Islamic law. That people do not ask religious scholars, but they ask the physicians. And he said, what a calamity, what a disaster do we have now. They wrote about this, and I quoted them in my publications. Now I will go to the conclusion. Yes. The scientific or biomedical revolution and technologies that challenges many of the long-established perception in our life, thanks to this, a new mechanism, an innovative mechanism has been introduced in the Islamic tradition, which is the collective ijtihad, الاجتهاد الجماعي. اجتهاد الجماعي. Religious scholars, except someone will sit with them on the table to discuss what does Islam say or should say about this issue. But they still maintain the traditional paradigm. So, sources of legislation, Quran, Sunnah, Qiyas, Istihsan, analogy, juristic preference, the edifice of the usul and Islamic law remains still untouched. And the physicians come in the meetings in order to speak the juristic language, not the bioethical discourse. They have to speak the juristic language. So this is still the case. So there is innovation at one hand, and very traditionalist approach on the other hand. What we try to do now in our center is to problematize this approach that we have now. So there is a very important step that has been done, accepting partners from outside the religious tradition. This is a very important step. But the Nazila or Nawazil approach, the new issues approach that they speak about, should be broadened. What is Nazila here is not the issue at hand. It is not that we have to speak about brain death. It is not that we can use humans in order to treat other humans. Now we use humans as medicine. Take your eye and transplant it in someone else says eye, etc. So we use humans as medicine. This is not the issue, but the age we live in, this is the nazila. And the scientific technology, biomedical technologies that we have is just a byproduct of the age that we are living in. So the age itself, the epoch, Lazhar that we live in, is the real nazila which did not exist before. So to look only at the issue will not be enough if you don't take the full picture. And the full picture is much broader than the patient-doctor relationship. Tariq spoke about the first seminar we had about bioethics, and we were speaking about principles of biomedical ethics, which is an important genre of literature now in Western bioethics. And the principles were justice, autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, etc. And the religious scholars, they were saying, but what's the point? These are principles which can be for economics, which can be for finance. Why? There is a patient-doctor relationship, so it should be mercy, should be compassion to the patient, etc. They do not realize that now the one who decides is not the physician, but the multi-international insurance company, who can tell the physician, you can write this medicine, you cannot write this medicine. And if you did, you will be fired. You will not get your salary. They don't get the full picture, that it's much more bigger than it is, that it's not, for instance, it's not only state intervention. That if we have human cloning, which is problematic, we say to the governments, don't fund research, because the multi-international companies will still fund. And they are most important funders than the governments themselves. So that economics, that finance, that the environment should also be should be integrated in their perception, in their tasawwur of the issue. And also the issue of the third, shared authority. I understand that many of people here with us, they are very worried that the religious scholars still have the final say about what about the Islamic paradigm, about the Islamic standpoint. They are still the ones who say this is halal and this is haram. And some of us are concerned they shouldn't be, they don't know what's going on, etc. And I say, if we went into this way and we try to get them of this authority, it will be a disaster. We will get with much more disastrous situation than the situation we have now. So we have now people who give statements that can be right or wrong, but later on we will have no people to give anything. So it will be a big case. This one thing. The other thing, without religious scholars, you cannot speak about Islamic bioethics. This is my full conviction. Without religious scholars, you cannot speak about. You can speak about bioethics, okay? Like what's going on in some European and American academics, okay, it's bioethics, but it's not Islamic. It's not Islamic. There should be someone who is expert in the hermeneutics of the Islamic tradition. If you don't have this one, you cannot say that you are speaking about, you are developing an Islamic paradigm. So there must be a specialist in this issue. As we have a specialist in biomedicine, we have a specialist in economics, we have a specialist in finance, we have a specialist in social science, etc. There must be a specialist who is one of the core parts of the whole process, who is specialist in the Islamic tradition. This specialist, if you have big problems with calling him a faqih, call him whatever you like. It's a specialization. If you have this specialization by him X or Y or Z, I have no problem. But there should be someone. There must be someone. This someone can be a physician who had a very good training in the Islamic tradition. Okay, no problem. As long as he has the specialization, no problem. There is now in Malaysia, they have an undergraduate program. When you finish, you can go to medicine or you can go to Sharia. Because they study both. They are well equipped to develop further in medicine or in Sharia. I think this is an amazing development. If we will have this, and okay, you don't call them the jurists, it's okay. And I think it's okay also. Yeah? Am I on time? Yeah, this was my point. Very final thing, if I may add, just in a few seconds. social sciences. Social sciences are still very problematic issue when you speak about ijtihad al-jama'. Biomedicine, bringing physicians on the table, religious scholars have no problem. But social sciences they have. Because first of all, they think that they can work without social scientists. It's about marriage and divorce, etc. So they are not very important. We know it already. We are human beings, we know. The second thing, they don't believe in social scientists in the same way they believe in medicine. Medicine, I mentioned, they speak about certainty, yaqeen, qat'i. But social sciences, it's imagining all the time, making tables and tables and tables. You don't come to a conclusive conclusion. So why do we need social scientists? Although we know now in biomedical ethics that the psychology of people, the mentality of the people, that you give them the medicine is very crucial. So if you are not going to include social sciences, social scientists, the presence of the physicians, the benefit of the presence of the physicians and integrating them will be very limited. So again here they need some discussion, some internal discussions with them in order to highlight and demonstrate the significance, relevance, and importance of integrating social sciences as well. And I think this is one of the very innovative things that we will do in our center, that we will try at least to include social sciences in these discussions. Thank you very much for your patience to listen to me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ghaly. So we do exactly the same. We have to finish by 25 in order for you to go straight outside to take taxis because we will block the traffic outside. So you have no it's darura. So you have to do that. So you have one or two or three questions of clarification just on this. And just one thing that I wanted to tell you just before, because the program is coming and January is coming with it. But as you know, we go to the mosque, we will have our lunch there, and at 3:30, Ramon is going to give us a talk about an Andalus and the history. So, and then at 4:30, we'll have our 2 hours there. And then at 6:30, we are expecting the CILE team, the teachers and the Yemen team, the teachers, only the teachers, to be with us at 6:30, to come together at 6:30. So, first questions? Yes, 1, 2, and the third one, 3. That's it. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for that pertinent presentation. So my question is kind of more practical, and it's about like navigating something. So there are a lot of times that people in various Muslim communities end up giving authority to a person who is a physician and may have usually has Islamic knowledge, but they end up getting all this authority and support. But if you approach them like critically, they're not as well versed as they ought to be. So how do you navigate things like that without? Actually, I don't know. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, you take the 3 and then I go.
Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned corporations, and you're talking about ethics. So I was wondering in what broad ways are you speaking back to the medical field and its implication in like destructive systems, like the drug industry and these kinds of things? How are you ethically, from an Islamic perspective, speaking back in a deeper critique towards these kinds of things, these issues?
Last one, right?
So you've been talking about this partnership between biomedicine and researchers from the religious field. My question is that can you include another part or third part, which is researchers from women's studies? Because, for example, I was talking about, I was reading the article about the beginning of life. There are many answers which are getting from, we can get from our answers for us, for people working on this research, on research about femininity and so on. Okay, so it's very interesting.
Okay, so you will have time to answer the three questions. I want you to get the picture of what we did this morning, from the introduction and then the history and now a practical case. You can see how it matches. One is just from the text to the reality and through history, and now it's a practical, a translation of inductively how we have to come back to what we are doing. So it's really the whole picture. From all these three lectures, you got a vision, or at least a sense of the whole methodology. It's inductive and deductive, and at the same time, the way we deal with the sources. And from the practical side, well, in fact, in medical science, this is where the Muslims are ahead. This is why we are doing this. So I think that it's important for you to get a sense of what we are trying to do with the first day, and how the three talks are complementary.
I think two questions have to do with stakeholders, those who participate, and listen also have authority to say something about it. We have at the moment something on the ground and something we aspire for. On the ground, jurists, the fuqaha, are the most productive. The legalist approach is the most productive when it comes to biomedical ethics. The fiqh academies, they produce hundreds of volumes on almost every issue you speak about, like the drugs, drug industry. What kind of components can we have in the drugs, what kind of components we cannot have, even ritual slaughter, ingredients in the food, etc. They are the most productive. You can criticize them, you can speak about that they are not good, they don't understand the issue, they are too legalist, etc. But this is the product that we have now. So when Muslims on the ground raise a question about a specific issue, I am a father, I have problems with fertility with my wife, we need to do IVF. Is this possible or not? The one who has an answer now is the jurist. This is the one who did a lot of work and produced something. So this is what we have. So that's why we have still the final word to say about what's going on. Even physicians, IVF clinics in the Middle East, in Egypt and Lebanon, you get into the IVF clinic, you see big boards speaking about the fatwas that have been issued by the religious scholars, and that we as a clinic, we follow them very correctly. Like the Sharia boards for banks, they have been certified. So the IVF clinics also have been certified. Why? Because they are the most productive, they introduced something. The ideal, what we want to achieve is that we move from a fatwa discourse to from a fatwa approach to a bioethical discourse approach, that we understand why these things happen. What kind of changes will be introduced if we integrate theology, if we integrate philosophy, if we integrate social sciences, if we integrate gender studies, etc. What kind of changes will happen? This is something that we still have to do. We still have to do. And when you do this, you can speak about the shared authority, you can speak about minimalizing the authority of justice, etc. But this is something that should be done, and there are very serious questions that need to be handled in the process, in the methodology. How are we going to? You speak about, for instance, the gender studies. There is a genre in bioethics which is called feminist bioethics. We have no single work on this from an Islamic perspective till now. We don't have it. So if you say to the religious scholars, we want to have feminist bioethics, also, I think it will not be an easy thing to do. To use nice words. So, although it is very much needed, but before speaking about the feminist approaches to bioethics, I think we need to speak about including women in the first instance. When it comes to physicians, yes, there are women. There are women in the academies, and they attend, they participate. Not very well, but they are there. When we come to the religious scholars, maybe one or two, I have come across, I didn't read every single thing. I read them globally, and then I did some research on some volumes. There are very few women, astonishingly few, amazingly few, and I find it really painful. I find it really problematic. It's unacceptable. We cannot go further like this. But the problem is not only a bioethical problem. It's an education problem. It is an education problem. We don't have good education to produce for us female Muslim jurists. So maybe our colleagues in the field of education can help us in this field. But there is a lot to be done in this field. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the last point was it's a problem in all the fields, and even within the center. I was talking with two of the participants asking about even our team. It's how we will get women, and this is where we have it in mind. It's clearly there. The problem is to find the right person and to have this understanding, and I think it's a challenge, and it means we can sit down and say it's unacceptable, which is unacceptable, but yet it's also coming from the Muslim community and the people who are training, and to take a decision. We can be passive and say, where are the women? But we also need to have women being trained and going that way. It's in religious studies. We just cannot complain all the time. We need to have women being involved in religious studies, which is something which is critical for the time, for the future and for now. So it's right down. We are very disciplined, you see, Ramon? So we have to go straight outside, no discussion, don't stop. We go every day, go.
There's just no women that exist in the field. I know. We've never thought of bioethics before. Doesn't matter. Yeah.